Look at David. He was anointed to be king as a young boy, but he didn't step into the throne overnight. He went back to the fields tending sheep. He faced opposition from his own family. He had to run for his life from King Saul. There were years where it seemed like nothing was happening, where it looked like the promise had been forgotten, but the whole time God was preparing him. He was developing his character, teaching him to trust, strengthening his faith. When the time was right, the door opened and he stepped into everything God had for him. You may be in a waiting season right now, but that doesn't mean the promise isn't coming. Don't get discouraged by the delays. Don't let the enemy convince you that it's never going to happen. What God started in your life, He will finish. It may not happen the way you thought. It may take longer than you expected, but His timing is perfect. Every closed door, every delay, every detour, it's all part of His plan. The reason we don't see the promise fulfilled right away is that we're not ready yet. God isn't just working on the situation, He's working on us. He's building our faith, stretching us, preparing us for the blessing. If He gave it to us too soon, we wouldn't be able to handle it. The process is what makes us stronger. The waiting is what deepens our trust. When the time is right, the doors will open and you'll step into something greater than you ever imagined. That's why you can't let circumstances determine your faith. You can't base your belief on what you see, what you feel, or what others say. Faith is trusting when you don't see a way, believing when every voice says it's not possible, standing firm when everything in you wants to give up. The enemy would love for you to quit, to settle, to stop expecting. But you have to remind yourself, God's word cannot fail. If He said it, it's as good as done. Think about Abraham. God told him he would be the father of many nations, but for years he and Sarah remained childless. In the natural, it seemed impossible. But Abraham didn't waver in his faith. He kept believing. He kept trusting. And at the right time, against all odds, the promise came to pass. You may be facing something that looks too big, too far gone, too impossible. But don't let what you see in the natural limit what God can do in the supernatural. Just because you don't see a way doesn't mean God doesn't have a way. He's already lined up everything you need. He's already planned the breakthroughs, the opportunities, the right connections. You just have to keep walking by faith, keep trusting, keep declaring His promises. The key is to stay faithful in the waiting. Don't let doubt creep in. Don't let delays convince you that the promise isn't coming. When it's your time, no person, no obstacle, no circumstance can stop what God has for you. His word is final. His promise is unshakable. His plan is always greater than what we can imagine. And when it happens, it's going to be bigger, better, and more amazing than anything you ever dreamed. Keep believing. Your breakthrough is on the way. There are moments in life when everything around you seems to contradict what God has spoken over your life. The promises, the dreams, the calling, they all feel distant, as if they may never come to pass. But the truth is, what God has spoken cannot fail. His word is not based on what you see, what others say, or how circumstances appear. His word is eternal, unchanging, and unstoppable. When He declares something over your life, nothing can stand in the way of its fulfillment. No opposition, no setback, no delay can cancel what He has ordained. It may not happen on your timeline or in the way you expected, but in due time, every promise will come to pass. The challenge is that in the waiting, doubt creeps in. Thoughts will tell you it's been too long. Maybe I heard wrong. Maybe it wasn't meant for me. But just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Delay is not denial. What you are waiting for is already on the way. Behind the scenes, God is aligning the right people, moving the wrong ones out, setting up opportunities and preparing you for the very thing you've been praying for. Sometimes the reason it hasn't happened is because He's making you ready. He's strengthening your faith, developing your character, and ensuring that when the blessing comes, you will be able to sustain it. Think about Joseph. He had a dream that he would be a great leader, but his journey didn't start in the palace, it started in the pit. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. Everything in the natural looked like the dream would never happen. But what seemed like detours were actually steps toward his destiny. The betrayal positioned him for the palace. The false accusation put him in the right place at the right time. What looked like obstacles were actually divine setups. When the time was right, everything changed in an instant. You may be facing delays, disappointments, or challenges that make you question whether God's plan is still in motion. But just like Joseph, what looks like a setback is really a setup. God knows how to take what was meant for harm and turn it for your good. What seems unfair now will be the very thing that propels you into your purpose. The doors that closed, the relationships that ended, the opportunities that didn't work out, they weren't meant to stop you. They were meant to redirect you. Sometimes the greatest blessings come wrapped in what looks like a loss. It's easy to trust when everything is going smoothly. But real faith is believing when you don't see a way. It's standing strong when there's no evidence that things are changing. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains. That's the kind of faith that causes the impossible to become possible. When you keep believing, keep declaring, keep trusting, doors will open that no one can shut. The right people will show up. The right breaks will come. Suddenly, what seemed impossible will fall into place. Not by your effort, but by God's hand. When He makes a promise, He already knows how to bring it to pass. He's not limited by time, by people, or by circumstances. He's the God who makes streams in the desert, who brings water from a rock, who calls things that are not as though they were. What He started in your life, He will finish. It doesn't matter if the odds are against you, if people are doubting you, or if it looks too far gone. God's word cannot fail. The key is to stay in faith. Don't let delays discourage you. Don't let disappointment steal your expectation. What's ahead of you is greater than what's behind you. The best days of your life are not in your past, they're in your future. What He has planned for you is bigger, better, and more fulfilling than anything you could ever imagine. Keep believing, keep standing, and watch as His promises come to life in ways you never expected. No matter what you face, no matter how impossible things may seem, remember this: God's word cannot fail. What He has spoken over your life will come to pass in His perfect timing. The delays, the setbacks, the disappointments, they are not the end of the story. They are simply part of the process. His promises are not dependent on circumstances, on people, or on what seems possible. They are anchored in His power, His faithfulness, and His unchanging nature. Hold on to your faith. Keep believing even when you don't see a way. Keep trusting even when the road is uncertain. The God who created the universe, who spoke the stars into existence, is the same God who is working in your life. What He started, He will finish. What He promised, He will fulfill. Doors will open, opportunities will come, and breakthroughs will happen because His word never returns void. Stay in faith, keep pressing forward, and watch He does more than you ever imagined. There is something powerful, unshakable, and eternal about God's word. It is not just a collection of stories, not just wise sayings written on pages. It is alive, active, and full of power. The same word that spoke the universe into existence, the same word that calmed storms and raised the dead, is still working in your life today. It cannot fail, and it will not return void. Maybe right now you're standing in the middle of a storm. You've been believing, praying, and trusting, but nothing seems to be changing. The enemy whispers, it's not going to happen. You're wasting your time. God's forgotten about you. But let me remind you, when God speaks a promise over your life, it is settled in heaven. It doesn't matter how long it's been, how impossible it looks, or what people say, God's word will come to pass. There is something powerful about God's word. It is not just ink on a page, not just words spoken in the past. It is alive, active, and full of power. When God speaks, things shift. Darkness has to flee, storms have to calm, and impossible situations begin to turn around. His word is unchanging, unwavering, and unstoppable. No force in hell, no opposition from people, and no delay can keep it from coming to pass. What He has spoken over your life is still alive, still working, and still moving things into place. Life throws challenges that make it seem like God's promises aren't working. The enemy whispers, "Look around. Nothing is changing. You've been believing, but nothing has happened." That's when you have to remind yourself, God's word does not return void. If He said it, He will do it. If He declared it, it will come to pass. It doesn't matter how impossible it looks. It doesn't matter how long it's been. His word is greater than what you see, greater than what you feel, greater than what people say. Think about how powerful His word is. In the beginning, when there was nothing but darkness, God didn't call for a meeting. He didn't sit back and worry about how things would change. He simply spoke. Let there be light, and instantly darkness had to leave. That's how powerful His word is. If His word had the power to create galaxies, to set the stars in place, to breathe life into humanity, then surely His word over your life is powerful enough to change your situation. When you hold on to His word, you're holding on to something eternal. Everything else in life is temporary. People may come and go, situations may change, and seasons may shift, but His word remains. If He has promised to be your provider, then no financial struggle is permanent. If He has promised to be your healer, then no sickness can have the final say. If He has promised to open doors, then no man can shut them. His word overrides the natural. The key is you have to believe it before you see it. That's what faith is all about. Faith doesn't say, "I'll believe when I see the breakthrough." Faith says, "I believe because He spoke it." Faith stands firm when the report is negative. Faith declares victory when the walls are still standing. Faith holds on when nothing makes sense, because faith knows that what God has spoken will come to pass, no matter how long it takes. Think about Abraham. God promised him that he would be the father of many nations. But year after year, there was no child. Decades passed, and still nothing. In the natural, it looked like the promise had failed, but God's word cannot fail. At the appointed time, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, and the promise was fulfilled. Maybe you're in that waiting season. Maybe you're holding on to a promise and it feels delayed. But just because it's taking time doesn't mean it's not going to happen. The longer the wait, the greater the testimony. What God spoke over your life is still in motion. You may not see it, but behind the scenes, things are shifting. The right people are being lined up. The right doors are getting ready to open. The opportunity you've been waiting for is already in preparation. Just because you don't see the evidence doesn't mean the miracle isn't unfolding. The enemy will try to distract you, to get you to doubt, to convince you that God's promises won't happen for you. He'll point to your circumstances, your past mistakes, your weaknesses. But when the enemy speaks, you don't have to listen. You can choose to stand on what God said, not on what the enemy is saying. Because God's word is final. His word is settled. His word is greater than the opposition. Maybe today you need to shift your focus back to what God has spoken. Maybe you've let doubt creep in. Maybe you've been listening to the wrong voices. It's time to get back to His promises. Declare them over your life. Speak them over your future. Remind yourself of what He said, because when His word is the foundation of your life, You won't be shaken by the storms. You won't be moved by temporary setbacks. You won't live in fear or anxiety. You'll live in peace, in confidence, in victory. There are moments in life when everything around you seems to contradict what God has promised. You look at your circumstances and they don't line up. You hear the voices of doubt telling you it's not going to happen. You face obstacles that seem impossible to overcome. But here's the truth. What God has spoken over your life is greater than what you see. His word is more powerful than any circumstance, any delay, or any opposition. His promises are not based on what's happening around you. They're based on His unchanging faithfulness. When He speaks, things begin to shift, even if you can't see it yet. The greatest battle is in our minds. The enemy's strategy is to plant seeds of doubt to get you to focus on what's not happening, on how long it's been, on all the reasons why it won't work out. He wants you to look at the natural instead of trusting in the supernatural. But when God gives you a promise, it's not based on human logic. It's not limited by time or circumstances. His word is eternal, and it cannot return void. Think about Joseph. God gave him a dream that he would be in a position of influence, that he would be a leader. But for years, everything in his life pointed in the opposite direction. He was thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, falsely accused, and put in prison. If you looked at his situation, it seemed like the dream had died, but what God had spoken was still alive. The delays, the betrayals, the disappointments, they were not the end of the story. At the right time, God opened the door. Joseph was promoted to the palace in a single day. What looked like years of setback was actually years of preparation. That's what you have to remember. Just because it's taking longer than you expected doesn't mean God's promise isn't coming to pass. Just because the situation looks impossible doesn't mean God can't turn it around in an instant. One touch of His favor and everything can shift. The dream that seemed buried can come to life. The breakthrough that felt out of reach can suddenly appear. The closed doors can swing wide open. The key is to stay in faith even when it looks like nothing is changing. That's what separates those who walk in God's promises from those who give up too soon. It's easy to trust when everything is going your way, but real faith says, God, I trust you even when I don't see the evidence. I believe your word even when circumstances say otherwise. That's the kind of faith that brings breakthroughs. When you're in a waiting season, don't let frustration steal your joy. Don't let discouragement make you settle for less than what God has for you. His timing is always perfect. If He hasn't done it yet, it's because He's still preparing something greater. He's working behind the scenes, aligning the right people, setting up the right opportunities, making sure that when the promise comes to pass, it's better than anything you could have imagined. Think about how powerful His word is. He spoke the universe into existence. He created the sun, the moon, the stars, the mountains, and the oceans, all with just a word. If His word can create galaxies, then surely His word over your life is powerful enough to bring that healing, that restoration, that breakthrough. The same God who spoke light into darkness is speaking over you right now, declaring victory, declaring favor, declaring new opportunities. Maybe you've been believing for something and it feels like nothing is happening. Maybe the enemy has been whispering, it's never going to change. It's too late, you might as well give up. But don't believe those lies. Keep standing, keep speaking His promises, keep expecting, because what He has spoken will come to pass. There's no mountain too big, no delay too long, no opposition too strong to stop what God has ordained for your life. His word is settled. His promise is certain. And at the appointed time, He will bring it to pass. Keep holding on. Keep trusting. The breakthrough is already on the way. There are times in life when everything around you looks like it's not going to work out. You've prayed, you've believed, you've done the right thing, but the situation hasn't changed. The medical report still says it's impossible. The financial struggle is still there. The relationship is still broken. It's easy to think maybe it's not meant to be. Maybe this is where I'll always be. But just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. What God has spoken over your life cannot fail. His promises are not based on circumstances. They're based on His power. The same God who spoke the universe into existence, who parted the Red Sea, who brought down walls with a shout, He's the one who has spoken over your life. His word cannot return void. When you understand this, you stop looking at how big the problem is and start looking at how big your God is. You stop worrying about the delay and start trusting that the delay is part of the process. Just because you don't see anything happening doesn't mean God isn't working behind the scenes. He's arranging things in your favor, aligning the right people, moving the wrong ones out of the way, preparing you for the blessing that's coming. Sometimes what looks like a setback is actually a setup for something greater.